Maya Rivers curled up beneath the massive mahogany desk in the corner office of Blackwood Innovations, her thin blanket barely keeping the chill at bay. The entire 32nd floor was silent, except for the soft hum of the heating system that never quite reached this far corner at night. She had scraped together her last few dollars for a bus ticket to the city, hoping for a job interview that never materialized. Every penny mattered now. She was here in Chicago to find stability after 3 tours in Afghanistan left her with nightmares, an honorable discharge, and nowhere to call home. "One more night," she whispered, tucking her backpack under her head like a pillow. "Tomorrow I'll find something better." The security guard who'd befriended her, an older veteran named Frank, had slipped her the keycard weeks ago. "Just until you get on your feet," he'd said with understanding in his eyes. Maya only used it when temperatures dropped below freezing, careful to arrive after midnight and leave before the early birds arrived at 5 a.m. She'd managed to stay undetected for nearly a month. The office belonged to someone important. Photos of a stern-faced man shaking hands with politicians lined the walls. Industry awards filled the shelves. Maya had been careful not to disturb anything, leaving no trace of her nightly refuge. The plush carpet was softer than any shelter floor, and the bathroom down the hall had hot water for a quick wash. It was luxury compared to the streets. Maya's eyes grew heavy as exhaustion took over. She hadn't slept properly in days, between the cold nights outside and the constant vigilance required to survive. The gentle whoosh of the building's ventilation system was like a lullaby, and before long her head tilted to one side, eyes fluttering, closed. She didn't hear the elevator ding at 4:30 a.m. or the steady footsteps approaching the office. In her dreams, she was back home in Ohio, before everything fell apart. Before she traded textbooks for combat boots and a normal life for one defined by service and sacrifice. The lights flicked on without warning. Maya's eyes snapped open, her body instantly alert from years of military training. She was still partly hidden under the desk, but her blanket extended past its edge, a rookie mistake. Before she could retreat further or plan an escape, a deep voice cut through the silence. "What the hell is this?" Standing in the doorway was a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, despite the early hour. His steel-grey eyes were fixed directly on her hiding spot, brows furrowed in what might have been anger or confusion. This wasn't some middle manager. This was Jackson Blackwood himself, founder and CEO of Blackwood Innovations, one of the most powerful technology companies in the Midwest. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd faced gunfire with more composure than she felt now. Slowly, she emerged from beneath the desk, straightening to her full height. Despite her circumstances, she stood tall, meeting his gaze directly, the same way she'd faced superior officers. "Sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I can explain." Blackwood didn't call security immediately, which surprised her. Instead, he assessed her with calculating eyes, taking in her worn combat boots, the military precision of her movements, and the small silver dog tags that hung around her neck. "I'm listening," he said, closing the office door behind him. What Maya couldn't know was that Jackson Blackwood hadn't slept in his own bed for months, preferring the solitude of his office to the empty mansion that no longer felt like home, and that the man who found her sleeping under his desk carried his own invisible wounds from a war fought decades before hers. The unusual encounter that would change both their lives had only just begun. Maya stood in line at the downtown Veterans Resource Center, clutching a worn manila folder containing her discharge papers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering pallor. 3 days had passed since her encounter with Jackson Blackwood, and her mind still replayed their conversation in fragmented loops. "Afghanistan?" he had asked. expression unreadable as he poured himself coffee from the expensive machine in the corner of his office. "Yes, sir. 3 tours. "Army specialist," she'd replied, hands clasped behind her back in parade rest, an old habit she couldn't shake. He hadn't called security. Instead, he'd asked surprisingly specific questions about her unit, her missions, her transition back to civilian life. Then he'd opened his wallet, pulled out $300 bills and placed them on the desk. "Get yourself a room, a real one, and a decent meal," he'd said. "Then come back Friday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. We'll discuss a more permanent solution." Maya had taken the money, unsure if it was charity, a bribe to keep quiet, or something else entirely. Either way, she couldn't refuse. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "Next," called the receptionist, pulling Maya back to the present. She stepped forward, sliding her folder across the counter. "I'm here to check on my housing application. Rivers, Maya E." The woman typed something into her computer, her acrylic nails clicking against the keyboard. "Still pending. There's a 6-month wait list for transitional housing." She didn't look up as she spoke. "You can try the shelters on Harrison Street." Maya nodded, retrieving her folder. Another dead end. She'd already tried those shelters, all perpetually full, especially in winter. The room she'd rented with Blackwood's money was only paid through tomorrow. After that, she'd be back on the streets unless something changed. Outside, Chicago's wind cut through her jacket as she walked toward the small diner where she'd been, nursing single cups of coffee for hours, taking advantage of their free Wi-Fi to search for jobs. No one was hiring a former infantry soldier with no college degree and a 3-year gap in civilian employment. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Appointment confirmed. Friday, 8 a.m. J. Blackwood's office. Temporary security clearance arranged. Ask for Frank at reception." Her stomach tightened. So it wasn't a dismissive gesture after all. But what did he want? Maya had survived long enough to be suspicious of unexpected generosity. Nothing came for free in this world, especially not from powerful men. At Blackwood Innovations headquarters, Jackson stood at his office window, staring at the city below. The desk where he'd found Maya had been cleaned. No trace remained of the woman who'd made it her temporary sanctuary. He'd had the cleaning staff come through, but asked them to save anything they found. All they'd recovered was a faded photograph of a younger Maya in uniform, arm in arm with 3 other soldiers, in front of a dusty Humvee. He'd placed it in his desk drawer, unsure why he felt compelled to keep it safe. "The background check came back clean," said Margaret, his executive assistant, placing a folder on his desk. "Honorable discharge, multiple commendations, specialized in communications and intelligence. No criminal record, struggled to find employment after discharge, no family contacts listed." Jackson nodded without turning from the window. "And the other thing I asked about?" Margaret hesitated. "The therapist confirms it's unusual. She says you should proceed with caution. Your history with veterans' causes is commendable, but this is different. Thank you, Margaret. That'll be all." When the door closed behind her, Jackson finally turned and picked up the folder. Inside was a more complete picture of Maya Rivers, her military achievements, her struggles since returning home, the support systems that had failed her. The photo on her file showed a different woman than the one he'd found under his desk, younger, confident, eyes unmarked by the hardship that now defined them. He thought about his own father, who'd returned from Vietnam a changed man, who'd built this company from nothing, then left it all to a son who'd never quite earned his approval. He thought about the emptiness of his penthouse, the absence of any real connection in his life, and the strange sense of purpose he'd felt when confronting the homeless veteran in his office. Jackson closed the file and checked his watch. A board meeting would start in 5 minutes. He straightened his tie and pushed thoughts of Maya Rivers aside. He had a company to run, shareholders to appease, decisions to make. Yet somehow, the memory of her standing at attention in his office, refusing to show weakness despite her circumstances, lingered like a challenge he couldn't ignore. Friday morning couldn't come soon enough. Maya arrived at Blackwood Innovations, headquarters at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. Another military habit. She'd spent her last few dollars on a second-hand blazer from a thrift shop, hoping to look somewhat professional. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her boots polished to a shine that would have impressed even her strictest drill sergeant. The gleaming lobby felt like another world, all glass, steel, and important people striding purposefully across marble floors. Maya approached the security desk, acutely aware of how out of place she must appear. "I'm here to see Mr. Blackwood," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Maya Rivers. I should be on the list." Frank, the security guard who'd once slipped her the key card, sat behind the desk. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Yes, Ms. Rivers, you're expected." He handed her a visitor badge. 32nd floor, Margaret will meet you at the elevator." As promised, a stern-looking woman in her 50s waited when the elevator doors opened. "Ms. Rivers," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Follow me, Mr. Blackwood is finishing a call." They walked past glass-walled conference rooms and busy workstations. Employees glanced up curiously as Maya passed. Visitors to the executive floor were uncommon, especially ones who didn't look like investors or corporate partners. Margaret showed her into a waiting area adjacent to Blackwood's office. "He'll be with you shortly," she said, then disappeared through another door. Maya sat rigidly on the edge of a leather chair, resisting the urge to fidget. Through the glass partition, she could see Jackson Blackwood pacing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear. He looked different than she remembered, more animated, less intimidating. He gestured emphatically as he spoke, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair in apparent frustration. Finally, he ended the call and pressed a button on his desk. Within seconds, the door opened. "Send her in," he said, and Margaret nodded toward Maya. Blackwood didn't sit when she entered. Instead, he extended his hand. "Specialist Rivers," he said, using her military rank. "Thank you for coming." Maya shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Blackwood." "Jackson, please." He gestured toward a chair. "Coffee?" "Yes." "Sir, I mean yes," Maya corrected herself, taking the offered seat. Blackwood poured 2 cups from the same machine she'd noticed during their first encounter. "Black, right?" he asked, and she nodded, surprised he'd remembered. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," he said, sitting across from her rather than behind his imposing desk. "The thought crossed my mind," Maya admitted. Blackwood studied her for a moment. "I've read your file," he said finally. "Your service record is impressive. Communications specialist, fluent in Dari and Pashto, Bronze Star recipient." Maya tensed. "You ran a background check on me?" "Standard procedure. When someone breaks into my office," he replied, but his tone carried no accusation. "Though I understand Frank made it less of a break-in and more of an unauthorized accommodation." Maya glanced down. "He was just trying to help. Don't hold it against him." "I don't," Blackwood said. "In fact, I'd like to help too. More effectively than just handing you cash for a temporary room." He reached for a folder on the coffee table between them. "I have a proposition. Blackwood Innovations has a Veterans Employment Initiative. We hire former military personnel for positions throughout the company. Your background in communications and intelligence would be valuable to us." Maya's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "With all due respect, Sir Jackson, charity jobs aren't sustainable. I don't want special treatment because you found me homeless." Something flashed in Blackwood's eyes. "Respect, perhaps. This isn't charity. We need..." Someone with your skills for a new cybersecurity project. The position pays 80,000 annually, plus benefits. You'd report directly to our chief security officer. He slid the folder toward her. Inside was a job description, benefits package, and employment contract. Why me? Maya asked, unable to hide her suspicion. There must be hundreds of qualified veterans looking for work, ones with degrees, certifications, who didn't sleep under your desk. Blackwood smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Because you have something they don't. And what's that? Persistence, resourcefulness, the ability to adapt to impossible situations. He leaned forward. And because you remind me of someone. Maya waited for him to elaborate, but he simply stood and walked to the window. My father was in Vietnam, he said after a long pause. 2 tours. When he came back, no one would hire him. He started this company with nothing but determination and spite. Blackwood turned to face her. He taught me that the measure of a person isn't how they handle success, but how they face adversity. Maya looked down at the folder in her hands, emotions warring within her. Pride urged her to refuse what still felt like charity. Pragmatism screamed at her to accept the lifeline. I can't promise I'll be any good at this, she said finally. I'm not asking for promises. Just show up Monday at 9 a.m. Give it 3 months. If it doesn't work out, we part ways. No hard feelings. Blackwood extended his hand again. Do we have a deal, Specialist Rivers? Maya stood and grasped his hand firmly. We have a deal. Neither of them could have predicted how this second encounter would alter the trajectory of both their lives, or that their connection ran deeper than either yet realized. 6 weeks into her new position at Blackwood Innovations, Maya had established a routine. Her small studio apartment, affordable with her new salary, was sparse but clean. Each morning, she arrived at work 30 minutes early, greeting Frank with a coffee before heading to the cybersecurity department on the 28th floor. The job itself challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. Her military training translated well to identifying security threats, but corporate culture remained foreign territory. She kept to herself mostly, eating lunch alone at her desk while studying industry reports to catch up on the 4 years she'd spent in combat zones instead of tech conferences. Tonight, however, was different. The entire security team was working late, racing to patch a vulnerability before it could be exploited. Maya had been the one to discover the weakness in their system, a backdoor that could have compromised client data worth millions. Rivers, called Samuel Chen, the chief security officer. Blackwood wants an update. Take these reports to his office. Maya gathered the documents and headed for the elevator. It was nearly midnight, and she assumed the executive floor would be deserted except for Jackson. She hadn't spoken to him directly since that first day, though she occasionally spotted him in the hallways or cafeteria, always surrounded by executives or assistants. The 32nd floor was dark, except for the light spilling from Jackson's office. Maya knocked softly on the open door. "Enter!" he called, not looking up from his computer. "Sir, I have the security reports you requested," Maya said, placing the folder on his desk. Jackson glanced up, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Rivers, sit down. Tell me what we're dealing with." Maya took a seat and summarized the situation. In clear, concise terms, the vulnerability, how she'd found it, the team's progress on patching it. Jackson listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed a deeper technical understanding than she'd expected from a CEO. "Good work," he said when she finished. "Samuel said you were the one who caught this. That kind of attention to detail is rare." "Just doing my job, sir," Maya replied automatically. Jackson leaned back in his chair, studying her. "How are you settling in? The apartment working out?" "Yes, sir. Everything's fine." The formal response came reflexively, the same way she'd always answered superior officers regardless of her actual circumstances. Something in Jackson's expression shifted. He stood and moved to a credenza against the wall, pulling out 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon. "Drop the sir, Rivers. It's midnight, and we're well past formalities." He poured 2 fingers in each glass and offered one to her. "And fine is what people say when they're anything but." Maya hesitated before accepting the drink. "Old habits," she admitted, taking a small sip. The liquor burned pleasantly down her throat. "I know something about those," Jackson said, sitting not behind his desk, but in the chair beside hers. The change in position altered the dynamic between them. Less boss and employee, more 2 people sharing a late-night conversation. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but expectant. Maya stared at the amber liquid in her glass, feeling the weight of words unsaid. "I still have nightmares," she confessed suddenly, surprising herself, "about Afghanistan. That's why I noticed the security breach. I wasn't sleeping anyway, so I kept working through the code." Jackson didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "My father had nightmares too. Korea. Then Vietnam. He'd wake up shouting orders to men who died decades ago." "Did they ever stop?" Maya asked. "No, but he learned to live with them." Jackson swirled the bourbon in his glass. "He built this company working nights because he couldn't sleep. Turned his demons into an empire." Maya looked up at him. "And you? What are your demons, Jackson?" The question crossed a line, and she knew it immediately. But something about the late hour, the shared drink, the unusual circumstances of their acquaintance made conventional boundaries seem less important. Jackson's expression tightened, then relaxed. "Failure," he said finally. "Disappointing a man who's been dead for 15 years. He drained his glass. "And loneliness, though I'd never admit that to anyone else in this building." The confession hung in the air between them, unexpected and raw. Maya realized that despite his wealth and power, Jackson Blackwood might be as isolated as she had been on the streets, just with better accommodations. "I had a squad in Afghanistan," she said, offering her own vulnerability in exchange for his. "They were family, closer than blood. When I came back alone, it was like—" She struggled to find the words. "Like missing a limb," Jackson finished for her. "But no one can see the wound, so they expect you to function normally." "Exactly." Maya stared at him, seeing not the intimidating CEO, but a man who somehow understood precisely what she'd been. Unable to articulate to therapists and counselors, Jackson refilled their glasses. "To the invisible wounds," he said, raising his in a toast. "And to those who see them anyway," Maya replied, clinking her glass against his. Neither spoke of the strange intimacy of the moment, how quickly they'd moved from professional distance to sharing their deepest vulnerabilities. It should have felt inappropriate, crossing boundaries between employer and employee, but instead, it felt like recognition, like finally being seen after years of invisibility. When Maya left his office an hour later, something fundamental had shifted between them. She was no longer just an employee he'd rescued from homelessness, and he was no longer just the boss who'd given her a chance. They had recognized in each other a similar brokenness, and perhaps the first glimpse of how they might begin to heal. The quarterly board meeting at Blackwood Innovations was a polished affair of expensive suits and calculated power plays. Maya, now 4 months into her role, stood at attention outside the main conference room, waiting to present the security team's findings. Her navy blazer, no longer second-hand but tailored to her athletic frame, felt like armor against the curious glances from passing executives. Jackson had insisted she lead this presentation herself, despite Samuel's protests that a junior team member shouldn't address the board directly. Rivers found the vulnerability. Rivers prevented the breach. Rivers will get the credit, he'd said with finality. Through the glass walls, Maya could see Jackson presiding over the long mahogany table, his posture impeccable as he fielded questions from silver-haired men whose combined net worth could fund a small country. In the 3 weeks since their late-night bourbon conversation, a careful friendship had developed between them. Twice they'd found themselves working past midnight, sharing stories over takeout food. She'd told him about her childhood in rural Ohio, her decision to enlist after high school. He'd described building Blackwood Innovations from the company. His father left him, the pressure of legacy weighing on every decision. Margaret appeared at Maya's side, clipboard in hand. "They're ready for you," she said, her usual crisp tone softened by what might have been approval. Maya nodded, gathered her materials and entered the lion's den. "This is Maya Rivers, head of our new penetration testing team," Jackson introduced her. "She'll walk you through the security improvements implemented this quarter." The presentation went smoothly at first. Maya's military briefing experience served her well as she outlined the vulnerabilities they'd identified and the solutions they'd implemented. The board members listened with measured interest until Victor Harrington, the oldest and most influential member, interrupted. "Ms. Rivers, your background is military, correct? No formal education in computer science or cybersecurity?" "That's correct, sir. My training came through the Army's intelligence division and how exactly did you come to Blackwood Innovations?" Harrington pressed, eyes narrowing. "Your resume doesn't show previous corporate experience." Maya hesitated, unsure how much Jackson had shared with the board about her unusual hiring. "I was recruited through the Veterans Employment Initiative," she answered carefully. Harrington turned to Jackson. "Is this the homeless veteran you mentioned taking a special interest in? The one found trespassing on company property?" The room fell silent. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, but maintained her composure. Years of military discipline keeping her expression neutral, despite the humiliation burning through her veins. Jackson's jaw tightened. Ms. Rivers's background was thoroughly vetted. Before her employment, her performance has been exemplary, as the numbers in your packets clearly show. "Performance isn't my concern," Harrington countered. "Judgment is, both hers and yours, Jackson." He looked around the table. "We're entrusting our company's most sensitive security matters to someone who was living on the streets just months ago. Someone with no formal credentials beyond military service. Victor," Jackson began, but Harrington wasn't finished. "And now we hear rumors of late nights spent in your office, special treatment, accelerated promotion. It raises questions about professional boundaries and decision-making." Maya stood frozen, watching the accusation land like a grenade in the center of the table. She'd faced combat, survived homelessness, endured the suspicious glances of co-workers who wondered how she'd risen so quickly. But this public dismantling of her worth and Jackson's judgment cut deeper than any previous wound. "If I may speak." "Sir," she said, addressing Harrington directly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please do," he replied, leaning back with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "My unconventional path to this company doesn't diminish my capabilities. It enhances them." Maya straightened her shoulders. "I identified vulnerabilities your traditional security teams missed because I approach problems differently. I think like an adversary because I've had to anticipate threats to stay alive, both in war zones and on the streets." She turned to address the entire board. "As for late nights in Mr. Blackwood's office, I assure you they were spent working on the security protocols that prevented what could have been a catastrophic data breach. If that constitutes special treatment, I accept the accusation." A tense silence followed. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Jackson watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride mixed with something else. Concern, perhaps. "Thank you, Ms. Rivers," Harrington said finally. "That will be all." Maya gathered her materials and exited with military precision, back straight, face composed. Only when the door closed behind her did she allow herself a shaky breath, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving her lightheaded. 20 minutes later, the meeting concluded. Board members filed out, avoiding her gaze as they passed. Jackson emerged last, his expression thunderous as he beckoned her to follow him to his office. "I apologize for Harrington," he said once the door closed behind them. "That was unprofessional and uncalled for." "It's fine," Maya replied automatically. "I've faced worse." "It's not fine." Jackson paced behind his desk. He had no right to question your qualifications or imply what he implied. Maya studied him, seeing the genuine anger on his behalf. "He's protecting the company. I understand that." "No, he's protecting the status quo. There's a difference." Jackson stopped pacing. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." The use of her first name, rare despite their growing friendship, caught her attention. "Of course. Do you feel I've given you special treatment? Crossed professional boundaries?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken implications. Had he? The late-night conversations, the rapid promotion, the personal interest in her welfare. These weren't typical CEO behaviors toward entry-level employees. "You gave me an opportunity when no one else would," she said carefully. "You saw value where others saw liability. Is that special treatment? Maybe. Is it wrong? I don't think so." Jackson held her gaze, something unreadable shifting in his expression. "Harrington's concerns about our friendship could make things difficult. For you here, I've faced difficult before," Maya replied. "The question is, are you prepared for the scrutiny? I'm just an employee, your Blackwood Innovations." "No," Jackson said quietly. "You're not just an employee, Maya, and therein lies our problem." The statement hung between them, neither willing to examine too closely what he meant, or what it might mean for their futures. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Maya found herself being gradually sidelined. Samuel had reassigned her from the main security project to a less visible role analyzing legacy systems. Invitations to strategic meetings stopped coming. Colleagues who'd warmed to her after the prevented breach now maintained a professional distance, as if proximity to Maya Rivers might somehow taint their own standing. Jackson had been conspicuously absent as well. No more late-night strategy sessions, no casual check-ins. Even his usual appearances in the cybersecurity department had ceased. The message was clear. The board's concerns had been noted and adjustments had been made. On Friday afternoon, Maya received an email from Margaret. "Mr. Blackwood requests your presence at his residence tomorrow, 2 p.m. Car will collect you. Professional attire not required." Maya stared at the message, anger and confusion battling within her. After weeks of distance, a personal summons, to his home no less, exactly the kind of boundary crossing that had raised eyebrows in the first place. She drafted 3 different refusals before deleting them all and sending a simple confirmation. Fee. Next day, a sleek black car delivered her to an address in Lake Forest north of the city. The house, mansion really, sat on several acres of wooded property, its stone facade imposing against the autumn landscape. A housekeeper met her at the door and escorted her through a grand foyer to a sunroom overlooking a carefully manicured garden. Jackson stood with his back to her, gazing out at the vibrant fall colors. Gone was the impeccable suit, replaced by jeans and a simple grey sweater that somehow made him look more human and less like the corporate titan whose name adorned the building where she worked. "You came," he said without turning. "I wasn't sure you would. Your assistant didn't present it as optional," Maya replied, remaining near the doorway. Jackson turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "Margaret has her own interpretation of requests versus commands." He gestured to a seating area. "Please sit. Would you like something to drink?" I'd like an explanation, Maya said, not moving. 2 weeks of radio silence followed by a private summons to your home doesn't strike me as standard protocol for addressing employee concerns. Jackson's expression sobered. You're right, it's not standard protocol, but then nothing about our situation has been standard. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of genuine discomfort. I thought distance would help quiet the rumors. I was wrong. It's only made things worse. Worse for whom, exactly? Maya asked, finally taking a seat on the edge of an armchair. For you, the company, or for me, suddenly treated like I'm radioactive after doing exactly what you hired me to do? For all of us, Jackson admitted, sitting across from her. Harrington has been speaking with other board members. There's talk of restructuring the security department, bringing in external consultants to review our protocols and our hiring practices. Maya felt her jaw tighten. Because you hired a homeless veteran who slept under your desk. Because I gave that veteran preferential treatment afterward, Jackson corrected. Because I spent more time with a junior security analyst than with my executive team. Because I showed favoritism that could be interpreted as something else. The implication hung in the air between them. So, that's it, Maya said, her voice dangerously quiet. You pluck me from the streets, give me a chance to prove myself, then cut me loose when it becomes politically inconvenient, when it might affect your precious company. Jackson flinched, as if she'd struck him. That's not what's happening. Then what is happening, Jackson? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you lifted me up just to watch me fall when the stakes got too high. I brought you here because I refuse to have this conversation in a building where every wall has ears, he replied, leaning forward. Because what I need to say isn't about Blackwood Innovations, it's about us. Maya crossed her arms. There is no us. There's a CEO and an employee who made the mistake of thinking their shared experiences meant something more than a corporate diversity initiative. Damn it, Maya! Jackson stood abruptly, pacing the sunroom. This isn't about diversity metrics or veterans initiatives. This is about the fact that for the first time since my father died, I met someone who actually sees me, not the Blackwood name or the company or the net worth, but me. He stopped, facing her directly. And yes, that terrifies me, especially because it's happening with someone who reports to me through a chain of command that I can't simply ignore. The raw honesty caught Maya off guard. She'd prepared for corporate doublespeak, for gentle dismissal, even for termination, but not for this naked vulnerability from a man who'd built his life around projecting strength and control. What do you want from me, Jackson? She asked, her voice softer now. He sat again, closer this time. I want to know if I'm alone in this, if I'm imagining the connection between us, if it's worth fighting for, even if it means restructuring an entire department to eliminate conflicts of interest. Maya studied him, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. She found none, only the same haunted intensity she'd recognized. That first night over bourbon, when they'd acknowledged their shared wounds. You're not alone, she admitted finally, but that doesn't change the reality of our situation. You built this company. It's your father's legacy. I won't be the reason it's compromised. My father's legacy, Jackson repeated, a bitter edge to his voice. Do you know what he told me before he died? The company is just bricks and patents, son. Finding someone who makes you want to be better, that's the only legacy worth having. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then completed. The gesture. I didn't understand what he meant until I met you. The touch sent a current through Maya's skin, unexpected and electric. She didn't pull away. This isn't just about Harrington or the board, she said quietly. It's about who I am, what I've fought for. I can't be the charity case who slept her way to the top. I need to earn my place. You have earned it, Jackson insisted. Your work speaks for itself. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. Maya shook her head. That's exactly the problem. I don't want special protection. I want respect earned on my own terms. Jackson fell silent, still holding her hand. Outside, leaves drifted past the windows, red and gold against the darkening sky, a reminder that everything, even the most established patterns, eventually changes. Then we find a way forward that honors both truths, he said finally. Your need for independence and my need for you in my life. Not as an employee, but as an equal. The words hung between them, both an admission and a question. Maya felt the weight of the moment, how her response might alter the trajectory of both their lives. I don't know if that's possible, she whispered. Neither do I, Jackson admitted, but I'm willing to try if you are. In the quiet of the sunroom, with autumn light painting shadows across their joined hands, Maya made her decision. Not with words, but by the simple act of tightening her fingers around his, a soldier's grip, strong and unwavering. Whatever came next would not be easy. But then, neither of them had ever chosen the easy path. The Blackwood Innovation Annual Charity Gala transformed the Chicago Art Institute into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over exhibits, temporarily rearranged to accommodate Chicago's elite. At $10,000 per plate, the event raised millions for veterans' causes while providing the perfect stage for corporate networking and power plays. Maya stood at the periphery, a glass of champagne, untouched in her hand. Her black dress, borrowed from Margaret, who had unexpectedly become an ally, was elegant without being flashy. A simple silver pendant in the shape of dog tags hung at her throat, a deliberate reminder of her identity among people who measured. Worth by stock portfolios and family names. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation at Jackson's home. 3 weeks of careful restructuring within Blackwood Innovations. Maya now headed a newly created subsidiary focused on veterans' cybersecurity training, technically separate from the main company, with her own budget and direct reporting line. To the board, rather than to Jackson. The arrangement preserved her professional integrity while creating a legitimate space for their personal relationship to develop away from corporate politics. Or at least, that had been the plan. Reality proved more complicated. Across the room, Jackson moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and making introductions. His tuxedo fit perfectly, as if he'd been born to wear formal attire rather than acquiring the taste through years of such functions. He hadn't approached Maya all evening, maintaining a professional distance that felt glacial after the warmth. Of their private conversations, he's playing it carefully tonight, said a voice beside her. Maya turned to find Samuel Chen, her former supervisor, sipping his own champagne. Smart move, considering the sharks circling. Maya followed his gaze to where Victor Harrington stood with several board members, their attention periodically shifting toward her with poorly disguised interest. I didn't realize I'd be the main attraction, she said dryly. Samuel's expression softened. Not you, specifically. The restructuring, the new veterans program. Harrington sees it as Jackson overstepping, changing company structure without proper board consultation. The board approved the program unanimously, Maya pointed out, after Jackson threatened to take his controlling shares elsewhere if they didn't, Samuel replied. That's not exactly winning hearts and minds. Maya stared at him. He did what? Samuel winced. You didn't know? He put everything on the line for this, for you. Told the board either they support the initiative with you at the helm, or he'd sell his shares to his cousin Thomas, who's been circling for years. It would have created chaos. The revelation hit Maya like artillery fire. Jackson hadn't mentioned the confrontation, had presented the board's approval as a natural outcome of the program's merit. The enormity of what he'd risked, his company, his father's legacy, his personal fortune, settled like a weight in her chest. Why would he do that? She whispered. though she already knew the answer. Samuel gave her a knowing look. For the same reason, you're standing here in a borrowed dress, instead of moving on to another company where your talent would be welcomed without the baggage. Some things matter more than corporate politics. Before Maya could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. Jackson had taken the stage, tapping a microphone to call for attention. "Welcome to the 15th Annual Blackwood Innovations Charity Gala," he began, his voice carrying easily through the grand space. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the success of our company, but our commitment to those who have sacrificed for our country." The standard opening gave way to acknowledgments of donors and partners. Maya half listened, still processing Samuel's revelation. Jackson had gambled everything on a restructuring designed to protect her reputation while keeping her in his life. The gesture was simultaneously grand and troubling, exactly the kind of protective intervention she'd specifically asked him to avoid. "This year, I'm especially proud to announce the launch of the Blackwood Veterans Cybersecurity Initiative," Jackson continued, pulling Maya's attention back to his speech. "This program will provide training and employment opportunities for veterans transitioning to civilian life, leveraging their unique skills to address the growing threat of digital warfare." Polite applause rippled through the room. Maya noticed Harrington and his allies offering only perfunctory participation, their expressions calculating. "The initiative will be led by someone whose journey exemplifies the untapped potential of our veterans," Jackson said, his eyes finding Maya in the crowd. "Someone who taught me that the path to success isn't always linear, and that true value can be found in unexpected places." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks as nearby guests began turning to look at her. This wasn't what they'd discussed. The plan had been to introduce the program without drawing attention to her personal connection to Jackson. Maya Rivers served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a communications specialist before facing the struggles that too many of our veterans encounter upon returning home, Jackson continued. "Homelessness, employment discrimination, a system ill-equipped to translate military expertise into civilian credentials." The room had gone completely silent. Maya stood frozen, caught between mortification at having her past broadcast to Chicago's elite and admiration for Jackson's unflinching directness. "I first met Ms. Rivers when she was seeking shelter in the Blackwood building during a particularly brutal Chicago winter," Jackson said, and Maya heard several gasps from the crowd. She'd been denied housing assistance despite her service. Record. Denied employment despite her skills, failed by the very system she had risked her life to protect. Jackson paused, his gaze sweeping the room with quiet intensity. "Many of you have wondered about the rapid restructuring of Blackwood's security division, about my personal interest in the Veterans Initiative. Tonight, I want to address those questions directly." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't damage control. This was something else entirely. "The truth is simple. Maya Rivers changed my perspective. She reminded me that my father built this company not just to generate wealth, but to create meaning, to transform lives. Under her leadership, the Veterans Initiative will carry forward that mission in ways that honor both our company's legacy and our country's obligation to those who serve." Jackson stepped away from the podium, then seemed to reconsider. He returned to the microphone, his expression more vulnerable than Maya had ever seen it in public. "One more thing," he said, voice softer now. "In the interest of full transparency, yes, I admire Maya Rivers. Yes, I restructured an entire division to eliminate conflicts of interest. And yes, I consider her presence in my life a greater asset than any balance sheet could reflect." He looked directly at Harrington. "If anyone finds that problematic, I invite them to reconsider their position on this board." The silence that followed was absolute. Maya stood motionless, champagne glass clutched so tightly she feared it might shatter in her hand. Jackson had just laid bare their relationship, not with a confession of romance, but with something more profound, a public declaration of her value, both to the company and to him personally. As Jackson stepped down from the stage, the crowd parted before him like water. He moved directly toward Maya, ignoring the stunned expressions and whispered comments that followed in his wake. When he reached her, he simply extended his hand, a public gesture mirroring their private moment in his sunroom weeks earlier. "Too much?" he asked quietly, for her ears alone. Maya looked at his outstretched hand, then at the watching crowd, then back to Jackson's face, open, vulnerable, yet resolute. "Perfect," she replied, placing her hand in his with the same certainty she'd felt in his sunroom. "But you're going to have some explaining to do to the board." Jackson's smile deepened, reaching his eyes. "Worth it," he said simply, and in that moment, surrounded by Chicago's most powerful figures, Maya finally believed him. Together they faced the watching crowd, their joined hands a silent declaration that some connections transcended corporate in politics, and that sometimes the most transformative action was simply standing beside someone when it mattered most. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows of the renovated warehouse in Chicago's West Loop district. What had once been an abandoned industrial space now hummed with activity. 20 veterans hunched over computers, learning cybersecurity protocols under the watchful eye of instructors who had once served alongside them. The Blackwood Veterans Cybersecurity Initiative had moved from concept to reality in just 6 months, transforming not just a building, but the lives contained within it. Maya walked the floor, stopping occasionally to check progress or answer questions. Her military-precise posture remained, but her expression had softened, confidence replacing the vigilant wariness she'd worn like armor during her early days at Blackwood Innovations. A young woman with a prosthetic leg raised her hand, and Maya leaned over to help troubleshoot a coding problem, her guidance patient but firm. "Miss Rivers?" The program's administrative assistant approached. "The donors are here for the tour." Maya nodded, straightening her blazer. "Send them in. Make sure the break room is stocked for the reception afterward." Moments later, a group of potential investors filed into the space, led by Margaret, who had taken on the additional role of liaison between Blackwood's corporate headquarters and the initiative. Among the visitors were several board members, including Victor Harrington, whose skepticism had evolved into reluctant respect following the program's early successes. "As you can see," Maya began, addressing the group with practiced ease, "our first cohort includes veterans from all branches of service. The 20-week program covers network security, penetration testing, and threat assessment, skills many of them already possess from their military training, just recontextualized for civilian applications." She led them through the facility, highlighting the state-of-the-art equipment, the dormitory spaces for veterans traveling from outside Chicago, and the counseling services available on site. The donors nodded appreciatively, several taking notes. "What's your placement rate?" asked a silver-haired woman in a tailored suit. 100% for our pilot group," Maya answered. 12 graduates, all employed within 2 weeks of completion, 4 at Blackwood Innovations, the rest at partner companies. "Impressive," the woman acknowledged. "And retention?" "Also, 100% so far. When you hire veterans, you get loyalty along with skill." The tour concluded in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the training floor. As the donors settled into chairs, Maya noticed Jackson standing quietly at the back of the room. He hadn't mentioned attending today's presentation, but his presence felt right, a reminder of how far they'd both come since that first encounter beneath his desk. "Questions?" Maya invited, focusing on the potential investors rather than the man whose support had made all this possible. Harrington cleared his throat. The program costs are substantial. How do you justify the expense compared to traditional hiring practices? The question carried no hostility, just the practical concerns of a businessman. Progress, Maya thought. The math is straightforward, she replied. The average cost to recruit, screen and train a cybersecurity professional exceeds $100,000 when you factor in headhunter fees, relocation and onboarding. Our program costs approximately $68,000 per graduate, and we're producing professionals with security clearances and crisis experience that civilian candidates typically lack. Harrington nodded, apparently satisfied. Beyond the numbers, Maya continued, there's something less tangible but equally valuable. These veterans have already proven their commitment to service, their ability to perform under pressure, their willingness to put mission above personal comfort. Those qualities can't be taught in a coding boot camp, the silver-haired woman smiled. Well said. As the formal presentation concluded and the group broke for refreshments, Jackson approached Maya, keeping a professional distance despite the warmth in his eyes. They're impressed, he said quietly. Patricia Donovan just told me she's doubling her foundation's commitment. That's excellent news, Maya replied, matching his professional tone despite the private joy that bubbled beneath the surface. 6 months of careful navigation had taught them both to balance their personal connection with public propriety. We can expand the next cohort to 30 participants. Jackson nodded, then added more softly, Dinner tonight? I have news. 7 o'clock, Maya confirmed, already mentally shifting her schedule. Perfect. They parted ways, Jackson joining the donors while Maya returned to the training floor. Neither noticed Harrington watching their brief exchange, his expression thoughtful rather than suspicious. Later that evening, Maya entered Jackson's Lake Forest home through the now familiar side entrance that led directly to the kitchen. The first time he'd cooked for her, an unexpectedly delicious risotto, had been a revelation. Jackson Blackwood, corporate titan, puttering around a kitchen in sock feet, cursing when he burned the garlic. Now their dinner ritual had become a sanctuary, a private space where titles and professional boundaries dissolved. Something smells amazing, she called, finding him stirring a pot of something rich and fragrant. Beef bourguignon, Jackson replied, leaning to accept her quick kiss. My father's recipe seemed appropriate tonight. Maya raised an eyebrow, slipping off her jacket. Sounds ominous. Should I be worried? The opposite. Jackson handed her a glass of wine, then returned to his cooking. The board approved the expansion plan this morning. Not just for Chicago. We're opening satellite programs in San Diego, Norfolk, and Fort Hood. Full funding for 3 years, with performance reviews thereafter. Maya nearly dropped her glass. Jackson, that's incredible. But I thought Harrington was still on the fence about expansion. He was the one who motioned for approval, Jackson said, turning to face her with an expression of lingering disbelief. Said the program's metrics speak for themselves. Miracles do happen, Maya murmured, taking a sip of her wine. There's more. Jackson's expression shifted, suddenly more serious. The board also voted on my proposal to restructure executive leadership. Maya tensed. Despite their careful balancing act, whispers about their relationship still occasionally surfaced, especially when decisions involving the Veterans Initiative came before the board. What kind of restructuring? She asked cautiously. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations, Jackson said, watching her reaction closely. Promoting Thomas to CEO while I transition to executive chairman. More strategic oversight. Less operational involvement. Maya stared at him, processing the implications. Jackson, you've been CEO since you were 28. The company is your life. Was, he corrected gently. Things change. Priorities shift. Because of me? Maya placed her wine glass on the counter, suddenly uneasy. I never wanted you to give up what you've built. Jackson moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Not because of you, because of us, because of what I've learned since finding you under my desk that morning." His grip tightened. "Maya, my father spent 30 years building a company and forgot to build a life. I was heading down the same path until you showed me there's more to legacy than stock prices and market share." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, setting it on the counter between them. Not kneeling, not making a grand gesture, just offering a possibility with the same straightforward honesty that had characterized their relationship from the start. "This isn't about giving up anything," he continued. "It's about making room for something more important." Maya looked at the box, then back to Jackson's face, open, vulnerable, certain in a way she'd never seen before. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "This isn't just another project, another challenge to overcome." "I've never been more sure of anything," Jackson replied. "The company will thrive under Thomas. The Veterans Program will expand with or without my direct involvement. But this, what we've found together, this is irreplaceable." Maya reached for the box, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band set with a single diamond, elegant without being ostentatious, much like the man who had chosen it. "I'm not good at traditional roles," she warned, though a smile was already forming. "I've never been anyone's wife, and I've never been anyone's husband," Jackson countered. "We'll figure it out together, like everything else." Maya slipped the ring onto her finger, surprised by how right it felt. Not a constraint, but a connection, a visible symbol of the invisible bond that had formed between two wounded souls who had recognized in each other the possibility of healing. "Yes," she said simply, and felt the final pieces of her fractured life shifting into alignment. Later, as they sat at the kitchen table sharing the meal Jackson had prepared, Maya thought about the journey that had brought them here, from homelessness to heading a program that was changing veterans' lives, from sleeping under a desk to sitting across from the man who owned it, planning a future neither had imagined possible. "I want to expand the counseling services," she said, ideas flowing freely now that the program's future was secure. "Too many veterans struggle with the transition. We can do more than just train them. We can help them heal." Jackson nodded, understanding immediately. "Whatever resources you need." "And I want to start a separate track for female veterans," Maya continued. "Their challenges are different. The services available to them are often inadequate." "Done," Jackson agreed. "We can use the east wing of the warehouse for dedicated facilities." Maya smiled, recognizing how seamlessly they had fallen into their complementary roles, her vision, his resources, her practical experience, his strategic perspective. Together, they were building something neither could have created alone. "You know," she said, reaching for his hand across the table, "a year ago I was sleeping under your desk, just trying to survive another night. Now we're sitting here planning how to change thousands of lives." Jackson's fingers interlaced with hers, his thumb brushing across the new ring. "And to think, if security had caught you that first night, none of this would have happened." "Thank God for Frank," Maya laughed. "Thank God for you," Jackson replied, his voice suddenly serious, "for having the courage to fight when it would have been easier to surrender, for showing me what real strength looks like." Outside the kitchen windows, spring had painted the world in vibrant greens and delicate blossoms, a season of renewal after the long Chicago winter. Inside, two people who had once defined themselves by their wounds now looked toward a future shaped by healing, not just their own, but for all those who would pass through the program they had built together. The bourguignon simmered forgotten on the stove as they leaned toward each other, sealing their commitment with a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility, and the sweet certainty that sometimes finding shelter in an unexpected place can lead to finding home in an unexpected heart. 5 years later, the gleaming glass headquarters of the Blackwood Veterans Foundation stood as a beacon on Chicago's riverfront. Once just a single program operating out of a renovated warehouse, the foundation now occupied an entire building, its modern architecture featuring a symbolic design where light filtered through precisely angled windows, creating patterns that shifted throughout the day. A visual representation of transformation, Jackson had explained to the architects. Today, the atrium buzzed with activity as veterans and their families gathered for the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration. Display booths showcased success, stories from each of the Foundation's 12 locations across the country. A wall of photographs documented the journey from that first class of 20 to the current network of over 2,000 veterans who had found not just employment, but purpose through the program's comprehensive approach. Maya moved through the crowd, greeting graduates and donors with equal warmth. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. The military precision remained in her posture, but her eyes held a peace that had once seemed impossible during those desperate days on Chicago's streets. "Ms. Rivers Blackwood," called a young man with a prosthetic arm, one of the program's earliest graduates. "The San Diego Center just got that government contract we were bidding on. $3 million for cyber defense training." "That's fantastic, Miguel," Maya replied, genuinely delighted. "Your team earned it. How's the family?" "Growing," he grinned. "Baby number 2 on the way." As Maya continued through the celebration, she found herself before the Foundation's mission wall, a massive installation featuring the words that had guided their work from the beginning: shelter, skills, service, strength. Beneath these core values was the Foundation's origin story, tastefully presented without romanticizing the hardship that had preceded it. The plaque read, "Founded in 2025 by Maya Rivers Blackwood and Jackson Blackwood following a chance encounter," that revealed both the challenges facing returning veterans and the untapped potential they bring to civilian life. What began as shelter beneath a desk grew into a nationwide movement to transform how America welcomes its warriors home. Maya traced the words with her fingertips, still sometimes amazed by the journey from that desperate night to this moment of fulfillment. The sound of a microphone being adjusted pulled her attention to the central stage, where Jackson stood preparing to address the gathering. At 52, Jackson's hair had more silver than before, lending him a distinguished appearance that suited his role as the Foundation's chairman. He'd fully transitioned from corporate leadership 5 years ago, passing the CEO position to his cousin Thomas, while focusing his energy on expanding the Foundation's reach. The business press had called it an inexplicable decision for a man. At the height of his corporate power, those who knew him understood it was the most natural evolution imaginable. "Welcome, everyone," Jackson began, his voice carrying clearly through the atrium. 5 years ago, we opened our doors with a simple belief that the men and women who serve our country deserve more than gratitude when they return home. They deserve opportunity, purpose, a chance to continue their service in new ways. Maya moved closer to the stage, watching with pride as the man who had once defined himself by corporate achievements now spoke passionately about human transformation. "Today, we celebrate not just the growth of a foundation, but the growth of a community," Jackson continued. 2,000 graduates, 1,500 job placements, 12 centers across the country, numbers that represent not just success, but lives forever changed. He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Maya. The look they exchanged contained 5 years of shared triumphs and challenges, of a partnership that had deepened through every test. None of this would exist without the vision and determination of our executive director, Maya Rivers Blackwood, Jackson said, extending his hand toward her. A woman whose journey from homeless veteran to national advocate embodies everything this foundation stands for. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as Maya made her way to the stage, accepting Jackson's outstretched hand, an echo of that moment at the charity gala years before, when they had first publicly acknowledged their connection. "Thank you," she said, addressing both Jackson and the assembled guests. "But I'm just one story among thousands. Every veteran in this room has faced their own battlefield, both in service and in the transition home. What makes this foundation special isn't buildings or programs. It's the community we've built together, the understanding that no one walks alone." Maya gestured to a group of current program participants seated in the front row. "5 years ago, I was sleeping under a desk because I had nowhere else to go. Not because I lacked skills or work ethic, but because the systems in place weren't designed to recognize what veterans could offer. Today, these new participants won't face that same isolation. They have a community waiting to receive them, to challenge them, to believe in them." A young woman in the front row nodded, wiping away tears. A recently discharged Marine who had arrived at the foundation just weeks earlier, carrying the same haunted expression Maya had once worn. "I want to share something personal," Maya continued, her voice softening. "When Jackson found me that morning, I thought my life was over, that I'd failed at both serving my country and finding my place after service. What I couldn't see then was that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the beginning of something greater than we can imagine." She turned to Jackson, reaching for his hand again. "Sometimes shelter comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the person who seems least likely to understand your struggle becomes the one who helps you rebuild." Jackson squeezed her hand, his expression conveying what words couldn't, the profound gratitude for the journey they had shared, the lives they had transformed together, including their own. "Today," Maya addressed the crowd again, "we're announcing the next phase of the Blackwood Veterans Foundation. Beyond job training and placement, beyond housing assistance and counseling, we're launching a venture capital fund specifically for veteran entrepreneurs. $10 million in initial funding to help those who served bring their innovations to market." Excited murmurs rippled through the audience. "Because veterans don't just need jobs," Maya explained. "They need ownership, agency, the chance to build something meaningful from the ground up, just as Jackson and I were fortunate enough to do with this foundation." As the announcement concluded and the celebration continued around them, Maya and Jackson stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet moment in his office overlooking the river. The space was nothing like his former corporate domain. Warm, accessible, with photographs of foundation graduates lining the walls instead of awards or accolades. 5 years, Jackson mused, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." Maya joined him at the window, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. "Having regrets about giving up the corner office?" "Not for a second," he replied without hesitation. "The company's thriving under Thomas. The foundation's expanding. And I finally understand what my father was trying to tell me all those years ago. About finding someone who makes you want to be better." Maya recalled his words from their early conversations. "About finding purpose beyond profit," Jackson clarified. "Though you certainly make me want to be better every day." Maya smiled, remembering the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate woman seeking shelter and a lonely executive going through the motions of success, to partners in both life and purpose. "I never thanked Frank properly," she said suddenly, "for giving me that key card, for taking a chance on a homeless vet when everyone else looked away." Jackson chuckled. "He's retiring next month. 20 years of service to Blackwood. I'm thinking of naming the new dormitory wing after him." "Perfect," Maya agreed. "The Frank Williams Housing Center has a nice ring to it." They fell silent, watching boats navigate the river below. Neither needed to articulate what they both felt, the profound gratitude for that seemingly random encounter that had changed everything. How a moment of desperation had led to a lifetime of purpose. How finding each other had allowed them both to find themselves. "Ready to head back to the celebration?" Jackson asked eventually. Maya nodded, but before they left the office, she paused beside his desk. Newer than the mahogany monstrosity she'd once hidden beneath, but positioned in the exact same spot. A deliberate choice they'd made when designing the foundation headquarters. "You know," she said, kneeling to peer under the desk with a mischievous smile, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you'd come in even earlier that morning. If you'd caught me before I had a chance to explain." Jackson joined her, both of them crouched beside the desk in their formal attire, laughing at the absurdity and the perfection of their shared history. "I'd like to think we'd have found our way here eventually," he said, helping her to her feet. "Some connections are just meant to be, regardless of how they begin." As they rejoined the celebration, greeting graduates and donors with the easy partnership they'd developed over years of shared purpose, Maya caught sight of the young Marine from the front row. The woman stood before the mission wall, reading the Foundation's origin story with an expression Maya recognized intimately, the first fragile blooming of hope after a long season of despair. And in that moment, watching a new journey begin. While celebrating the one she'd traveled with Jackson, Maya understood the most beautiful truth of all, that sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest possibilities, and that finding shelter in an unexpected place can be the first step toward finding home in an unexpected heart. You're watching Soul Journeys, where every story reminds us that life's most beautiful chapters often begin in our darkest moments. If you believe in second chances, in the power of unexpected connections, and in the possibility of transformation against all odds, we invite you to subscribe and join our community. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Maya and Jackson's journey from that chance encounter to building a legacy together. Have you ever experienced a moment that seemed like an ending but turned out to be a beginning? Remember to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story of courage, connection, and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. New videos every Wednesday that will touch your heart and renew your faith in the power of compassion. Thank you for being part of the Soul Journeys family, where we believe that everyone deserves a second chance and that sometimes the most unlikely encounters lead to the most beautiful destinies.